Stop! I'll buy her. The man's voice cut through the heat and the noise like a whip. He didn't know who she was, but that tattoo on her shoulder, he'd seen it before. It once saved his life. If that line gave you chills, hit the like button, drop a comment below. Stick around, the rest of this tale gets even deeper. The year was 1878, and the wind across the northern ridges of New Mexico did not whisper, it remembered. For Wes Calhoun, it was a sound he had grown too used to, like the breath of an old dying friend who refused to leave. His ranch, if you could call a plot of dust and broken fences a ranch, lay cradled in a barren bowl of dry hills and yellow grass, far from anything resembling life. Out here, the sky pressed down on a man, and the land gave back nothing but silence and the occasional groan of old wood. Wes had been out here going on 5 years, but time didn't move right once you left behind the sound of another voice. Each season bled into the next, with the same dry air, same sun-cracked porch boards, same quiet mornings broken only by the creak of the windmill and the scratch of boots on packed dirt. The days stacked like bones, and Wes carried them all. The cabin was sturdy because he'd built it with grief-carved hands. He laid every beam himself, stained every plank with sweat and memory. He'd built it for her once. Ellie, with hope in his chest and a baby on the way. She hadn't lasted the second winter. Fever, same as took the child. 1 week she was humming over the cook fire, next he was wrapping her in a quilt and lowering her into the earth, the frost hard as stone and his heart even harder. Now the wind was his only companion. It prowled the edges of the house at night, moaning like it mourned for him. Inside the cabin held no warmth, only order. A cot with a sunken mattress. A shelf with 4 tin plates, though he only ever used one. Her sewing still sat in the corner untouched, the thread rotted to dust. He'd meant to burn it, but couldn't. There were things even fire couldn't take. Wes was a man stripped to the grain, quiet, deliberate, held together by habit. He rose before the light and walked the fence line with coffee cooling in his hand. Fixed whatever the wind had knocked down, fed the horse-chopped wood, even when he had more than enough. Not because the work needed doing, but because it kept his mind from places it didn't want to go. He ate alone, slept alone, thought too much in the evenings, stared too long at the empty chair across from him. Some nights, he heard her voice. Not loud, not even real, just the trace of a memory, like the smell of rain on dry earth. Folks in town called him Ghost Man. Not to his face, but they said it. He saw it in their eyes when he came in for supplies. Once a month, maybe, if that. He didn't drink at the saloon, didn't talk to the girls leaning in the doorways. He bought beans, coffee, and powder for his rifle. Paid in coin, not in conversation. And when he walked back out, the silence came with him. They thought he was angry, maybe crazy, but Wes didn't care what they thought. Redemption was a town where folks played at being decent until their boots got muddy. He'd seen the way they looked at brown skin, at poor folks, at women with eyes too sharp. He wanted no part of that world. He hadn't come here to belong. He came to forget. But forgetting is a tricky thing. The land remembers even when you try not to. On a scorched afternoon in late August, when the wind was dry enough to crack your lips just by breathing, Wes rode into Redemption because he was out of flour and the mule had thrown a shoe. He planned to be in and out before sundown, talk to no one, buy what he needed, ride home. Instead, he found the crowd, the noise, the girl. A girl? No, not a girl. Not really on her knees with a burlap sack over her head, arms tied in front like some damn animal. Her dress, or what was left of it, clung to her frame in dirty shreds. Blood darkened the cloth near her wrists. 3 men stood behind her, smug and loud, cracking jokes and nudging each other as if she were meat. The crowd jeered. Someone threw a rock. It missed her head but hit close enough to send a cloud of dust into the air. She didn't flinch, didn't cower, just sat there. Then they yanked the sack off. The wind caught her hair, long, black as a raven's wing, and flung it wild around her face. She lifted her chin eyes, sweeping across the crowd with something like defiance. Even bleeding barefoot and surrounded by filth, she had the kind of stare that made a man feel small. And that's when Wes saw it. A tattoo inked high on her bare shoulder just beneath the torn strap of her dress. A bird drawn in sharp black lines, wings curled mid-flight. He stopped breathing. He'd seen that mark before. Out in the desert years ago when he had nothing left but bones and bitterness. Wes hadn't been looking for a way home back then, he'd been looking for a place to die. The fever had taken Ellie and the child she carried, and Wes had walked out into the wasteland with a bottle of whiskey and no intention of coming back. The sun had blistered his skin, the heat had peeled his mind apart, and still he wandered waiting for the dust to swallow him. But death never came. Instead, a figure had stepped out from behind a dune, brown-skinned, cloaked in leather and bone, silent as a prayer. The man had said nothing, just knelt beside Wes's broken body, opened a worn water pouch and held it to his lips. His wrist bore that same tattoo, a bird mid-flight inked in bold black strokes, its wings spread like it had somewhere better to be. Wes had stared at it, not quite sure if it was real. He had been the chief of a tribe that didn't even have a name Wes could pronounce, let alone remember in his own tongue. And yet out in that god-forsaken desert, the man had saved Wes's life without asking a single thing in return. No name, no words, just water silence and a direction. The man didn't speak a word of English, didn't ask questions, just sat with him through the night, fed him bits of dry meat, watched the stars, and when morning came, pointed east toward life, toward land, toward a second chance Wes hadn't asked for. Then he vanished, just like he'd appeared, leaving behind nothing but footprints and the echo of survival. Wes never forgot him. That bird on the man's wrist had been the first thing Wes had seen after deciding to die. And now, here it was again, tattooed on the shoulder of a girl being sold like livestock. This girl, she was kin. The auctioneer banged his gavel against the post. Starting at $5, laughter rippled through the crowd, mean and careless. 5. Hell, she ain't worth that much. Someone snorted from the back. Her eyes dark, steady, and far too calm for the situation flicked toward the voice. But she didn't flinch. Didn't lower her head. She remained still, knees in the dirt, wrists bound tight, the sun beating down like judgment. The crowd pressed closer, some with their lips curled in lust, others with nothing but mockery in their eyes. Wes stepped forward before he could stop himself. 5, he said, his voice low but clear, cutting through the heat and noise. The murmurs stilled, heads turned. A few frowned, others just stared. The auctioneer blinked, shrugged, then slapped the gavel again. Sold. Wes climbed the steps. The boards creaked beneath his boots. He handed over $5 silver, cold, hard, and heavy with something he didn't quite name. One of the handlers tugged the rope, pulled the girl to her feet, and shoved her forward. She stumbled. Her knees gave way before she could catch herself, and for a heartbeat she hung in the air between falling and refusing. Then she crumpled body hitting the platform with a hollow thud. Her breath hitched and her arms trembled. Wes dropped to a knee beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He slid one arm beneath her back, the other under her legs, and lifted her like a man who'd carried loss before. She didn't resist, didn't speak. But as he straightened with her in his arms, her eyes found his, and for the briefest flicker, he saw something change in them. A flash of recognition, a crack in the hardened shell. Her chin stayed high. He turned from the stage boots, thudding heavy on the wood as he descended. Behind them, the murmurs picked up again, meaner now, sharper. What's that fool Cowboy want with her? Don't know what he's bought. She'll bring him nothing but death. Wes ignored them all. He'd heard worse, much worse. And this time he wasn't walking away. She was light in his arms, not from youth, but from hunger. Bones wrapped in skin and silence. The jeering from the crowd hadn't stopped. Men called after them, sharp with mockery, bitter with scorn. But Wes didn't answer a damn one. He just shifted her weight in his arms, turned his back on the square, and started walking. They watched him carry her, watched the silent, beat-down girl with the bird tattoo vanish in the arms of a man they didn't understand. And when they were far enough, when the voices were swallowed by distance and alley wind, he stopped. He set her down for just a moment, leaning her gently against the livery wall in the narrow alley behind the stables. She didn't speak, just kept her gaze locked on his face, not pleading, not grateful, just watching. Wes saw what was in her eyes, then fear, yes, but something else buried deep, something sharp and waiting. "You know why I bought you?" he asked, voice low. She shook her head, slow and small. Wes took off his hat, ran a hand through his dust-coated hair. "Because 5 years ago your father saved me. I'd gone out in the desert wanting to die. He found me, gave me water, never asked why." Her lips parted, voice cracking as it pushed past thirst. "You remember him?" "I do." He bent down again. Without asking, without waiting, he lifted her into his arms once more. She didn't resist, just leaned into his chest, head resting near his collar, breath shallow. He carried her across town like that, past faces that turned away and others that stared too long. Through back lanes and across cracked boards to the stable where his horse waited, Wes moved with the weight of her pressed to him. She didn't say a word, didn't flinch when he loaded supplies or tied saddlebags, just watched. At the stable gate, he adjusted her in his arms and said, "What's your name?" Her voice was a rasp, but held firm. "Anoki." "Anoki," he repeated, tasting it, then nodded once. "I'm Wes." With one arm, he mounted the saddle. Then, steady and sure, he pulled her up into his lap, tucking her gently against him like something too fragile to tie down. Her head rested near his shoulder now, her legs curled slightly to the side, arms loose but not limp. And then they rode, out of the city and into the dying light. Wes kept her close, the rise and fall of her breathing grounding him more than the steady beat of hooves on dirt. The plains spread wide again, the sky opening above them, and only then did she speak. "You didn't have to do it." "I know." "Why?" "Because your father gave me a second chance when I wasn't looking for one." She shifted just a little, her fingers gripping his coat. "That was my father," she said. "Tawa." He nodded. "That's the name he gave me." A long silence followed. He thought she might have dozed, but then her voice came again, softer than before. "He's dead." He didn't press. "They came at night, said we owed them for using land that wasn't ours, called it tax. My father refused. They shot him in front of us." Wes didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "They took me, and my sisters. 3 of us." Her breath caught. "I fought, ran. They caught me again the next day, dragged me behind horses until I couldn't stand. I don't know where they took the girls." Her voice had gone flat, like she was reciting something from a dream she didn't want to remember. "You know who they were?" She nodded, her cheek brushing against his coat. "Outlaws, paid men, uniforms without badges. I saw their leader's face. I'll never forget it." Wes swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "How many?" 10, maybe more. They had others with them back at the camp." He spat. "That's a lot of bastards for one man." Her fingers curled tighter in his coat. "You scared?" He let out a dry breath somewhere between a laugh and a grunt. "Not yet." They didn't speak again after that. The wind picked up colder now. The sky faded into purple and then black. Stars pricked through the darkness one by one, quiet as prayer. By the time the cabin came into view, a shadow hunched in the middle of nowhere. Anoki had drifted into a half-sleep, her body limp, her breath warmer against his chest. He didn't wake her. Wes dismounted slowly, arms still around her. The front porch creaked under his boots. He nudged the door open with his shoulder, the scent of ash and dry wood still lingering from the morning's fire. Inside, he set her down on the cot by the wall, covered her with the old quilt Ellie once sewed, and watched her for a moment, watched the way her brows stayed tense even in sleep. Then he turned away, poured water into a tin cup, set it by the bed and sat down at the table. She was here now, and Wes knew damn well this wasn't the end of a rescue. It was the start of something harder, something real. The fire was low, just embers really, and the cabin had taken on the heavy stillness that only winter knows how to wrap around a place. Wes pulled the quilt up over her shoulders, then sat a while by the table, his boots still covered in town dust, listening to the faint sound of her breathing. He didn't light another lantern, didn't make a sound. He just sat, elbows on the worn wood hands clasped under his chin, eyes not looking at much of anything. His bones ached, and not from the ride. There was a different kind of weight now, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, Anoki was gone from the cot. He found her sitting by the woodshed a few feet from the door, wrapped in that same quilt, watching the tree line like it owed her something. She didn't say good morning, didn't ask for coffee or warmth. She just sat there, eyes dry and hard like stone. Wes didn't disturb her. Instead, he got to work feeding the stove, chopping a few logs for the pile, checking the stock for signs of frostbite. It was what he always did when he didn't know what to feel. Work was safe, predictable, and the ache in his hands kept him from sinking too deep into thought. He left a plate on the bench near her, jerky cornbread and a tin of warm coffee. She didn't move right away, but by the time he came back an hour later, the plate was empty, the tin cup washed and sitting by the pump. That became the rhythm of things. She stayed mostly out by the shed those first few days, coming in only to warm her hands or sleep on the cot. Wes moved to the small wood room beside the cabin, once meant for storage, now cleared out with a blanket and lantern hung from a nail in the beam. She never asked why he did that, never looked like she expected anything more. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't ask if she could. They just existed near enough to feel it. And little by little, the distance between them changed its shape. Not smaller, not closer, just less sharp. One afternoon, Wes came in from hauling hay and found the floor swept clean, the clutter on the mantel arranged neat and careful, the crooked picture of Ellie, his wife, gently dusted and centered. He stood there a while, staring at it. His throat felt thick. She hadn't asked, hadn't touched a thing beyond what needed tending. And beside the stove, his work shirt torn from barbed wire 2 days back was mended, folded, and placed on the chair. He found her out back, kneeling by the little plot of land that used to be Ellie's garden. The snow hadn't come heavy yet, but the ground was brittle. Still, she was out there with bare hands, pressing fingers to the dirt like it might answer her. "You're wasting time," Wes said gruffly, arms crossed. She looked up. "I know," and went back to digging. That was all. He started talking more after that. Not conversations exactly, just remarks. Things he said out loud that didn't need reply. About the weather, the fence line, that one damn cow that always managed to get through the north gate. Sometimes she'd glance his way. Sometimes she'd even answer. But mostly she just listened. There was comfort in it somehow, like talking to the trees. They didn't answer, but they stood there, and that was enough. Then came the storm. It rolled in overnight, loud as a train whined, screaming through the cracks in the boards like it had something to prove. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. By morning, the shed was buried to the roofline. She came inside without a word, wrapped tight in one of his old coats, her hair wet from the snow. Wes cleared the second cot in the corner near the stove and pointed. "Best stay in here. Ain't worth dying to prove a point." She nodded, and for the next 3 days they shared that small space like two ghosts pressed into the same story. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. She fixed the drafty window with old oilcloth and pine resin, stirred his stew when his shoulder ached, taught him how to pack dried herbs between cloth and place it against his bad knee when it swelled from cold. "You ain't a healer," Wes asked one night, half joking, watching her wrap his leg. Not exactly, she said. My mother was. Apache side. He looked at her, then really looked. You're full of surprises. She smiled just a little. So are you. Later, as the fire snapped low, he found himself staring at her hands, noticing the way they moved, the way her fingers had a memory of things that lived beyond books and doctors. You ever wonder, he said, voice thick in the warm dark, what the hell we're supposed to do with all this leftover living? She didn't answer right away. Then I used to think I'd die angry. He turned toward her, surprised. But now, she sighed. Now I just don't want to die empty. Wes didn't speak after that. He just sat there, letting the fire's heat soak into his skin, and realized something had shifted. Not in her, in him. The storm passed on the fourth night, but they didn't go back to how things were before. She still took the smaller room, but her things, a comb, a strip of cloth, a carved wooden charm stayed on the shelf now. She made coffee in the mornings before he rose. He started carving a chair for her by the hearth, not saying it was hers, just leaving it there. One night, as they sat beside the fire, both too tired to talk, she reached for the bowl in his lap to help stir the mash. Their hands touched. Neither pulled away. After a while, Wes spoke low. You remind me of her. She looked at him, brows lifting. Your wife. He nodded. Not in the way you look, or talk, but the feel of you in the house. Anoki didn't answer, but her eyes softened, and she let her fingers linger against his a second longer before taking the bowl. The next night he dreamt of Ellie for the first time in months, but she wasn't angry, wasn't sad, just smiling at him like she used to when the sun hit the porch right. He woke up with a hollow in his chest, but not the same kind. This one didn't ache, it just made room. Days passed. The snow began to melt from the eaves. Birds returned, cautious but brave. And in the quiet morning air, Wes looked at the girl by his fire, her hands working a bundle of herbs, her face calm and focused. She looked up suddenly. You're watching me. I am. Why? He hesitated. Because for the first time in a long damn while, I feel like I'm still here. Like I didn't just get left behind with the dust. Anoki smiled, small and quiet. You never were just dust. That night when he touched her hand again, she didn't let go. Not fast, not sudden, just quiet and true. And in the silence, something bloomed. Not love, not yet, but something close. Something like remembering what it meant to live. The sun hung heavy in the sky that day, a cruel eye glaring down on the plains. The wind had gone still, like even the earth was holding its breath. Wes stood outside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat clinging to his back as he dug a post hole by the barn. He hadn't spoken much that morning. Didn't need to. Anoki had taken to humming while she worked, and though the tune was quiet, it filled the silence in a way he hadn't realized he'd come to count on. That was when he heard it hooves. More than one. A slow roll of iron against dirt, steady and sure. He looked up and saw a line of mounted men cutting across the horizon, the sun casting their shadows long and jagged. 5 of them, maybe 6. Dust trailed behind them like smoke. Government-issue coats, uniformed, armed. He set the shovel down, wiped his brow with the back of his hand, and turned toward the cabin. Anoki, he called, his voice low but sharp. She came to the doorway, wiping her hands on a rag. When she saw the riders, she froze. Wes glanced at her, and that's when he saw it. Not fear, not quite. Something tighter, sharper. Her hand drifted to her sleeve just for a second. That was enough. Don't, he said, already moving. Inside. Now. But she wasn't listening. Her eyes had locked on the man at the front. A tall figure in a sun-bleached coat, his face lined and cold. Boone. Her breath hitched. It's him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Who? The man who killed my father. Before Wes could stop her, her fingers slid into her sleeve and closed around something steel. Her knife. Her whole body tensed, feet shifting like she was ready to run straight at death. Wes stepped in front of her. "Don't do this. He's right there," she hissed, teeth clenched, voice breaking. He's breathing, Wes. After what he did, he gets to stand there like nothing happened. Wes grabbed her arm. She struggled. Strong. Stronger than he expected. He wrapped both arms around her and lifted her clean off the porch. I said no. She fought him, eyes, wild teeth bared like a caged animal. Her feet kicked against the air, her hands shoved at his chest, but he didn't let go. Couldn't. "Let me go. I won't." Inside, he shoved the door shut behind them and carried her straight to the back room. She cursed at him, hit him, slapped his shoulders with her fists, but he didn't flinch. He lowered her down, braced the door shut from the outside, and slid the iron latch into place. The pounding started instantly. Her voice, raw with rage, came behind the wood. "He killed my father. You're keeping me from justice. I'm keeping you alive," Wes shouted back, jaw tight. "This ain't justice. It's suicide." But the yelling didn't last long. Slowly it faded into quiet sobs, sharp, ragged sounds that pierced deeper than anything she'd said. Outside, the hooves stopped at the fence line. Dust swirled around the patrol like ghosts circling a grave. Boone dismounted last slow and deliberate boots, landing hard on the packed earth. His face was older, but the sneer hadn't aged a day. "You Wes Callahan." Wes nodded. "That's right. I got reports you're harboring a fugitive. Native, female, Apache." Wes spat into the dirt. "That's so. Must be your lucky day, Boone, 'cause I ain't seen no fugitives around here. Just me, a busted fence, and a hot sun." Boone smirked. "You sure about that?" "Plenty sure." Well, now Boone stepped closer, thumb resting on the hammer of his pistol. "Seems to me if you got nothing to hide, you won't mind if we take a little look around." "You got a warrant?" Boone's face twitched. "No." Wes folded his arms. "Then the answer's no. You ain't stepping foot inside that house till you bring one signed by a judge. And unless you got X-ray eyes, you ain't finding what ain't there." The other men shifted in their saddles. Boone's jaw locked tight. "Fine," he muttered. "But I'll be back. Tomorrow. With paperwork. And when I do, we're tearing this place apart nail by nail." Wes nodded slowly. "Then you best bring a lunch." Boone stared at him just long enough to let the threat linger, then turned on his heel. The riders pulled away one by one, dust rising again like smoke off a fire. Wes waited until they were out of sight, then went back to the cabin. His boots were heavy on the wood floor. He slid the latch and opened the door. She was sitting in the corner, arms wrapped tight around her legs, her face wet and red. When he stepped in, she looked up, not with fury now, but something worse. Betrayal. He knelt slowly in front of her. "I had to," he said. "You locked me in," she whispered. "I know. You chose him. I chose you." Her hands trembled. He was right there. "I know." Her fist hit his chest hard and clumsy. Then again. Then softer. Then it was her forehead pressed against him and her body shaking, and the sound of her pain breaking loose in sobs she'd buried too long. "I should have killed him," she choked. "You would have died right after. Maybe I should have." "No," Wes whispered. "No, Anoki. You want justice? Then you live. You outlast him. You burn him down the right way." Silence stretched out between them. Then she nodded just once. The next night they rode, under a moonless sky, quiet as ghosts. Wes and Anoki left the ranch with what little they could carry. No fires, no trail, just two shadows slipping south. They rode for 3 days, avoiding towns, sleeping under brush, eating jerky and cold beans. Wes didn't ask questions. He knew where they were going, and she knew who they needed. Samuel Griggs lived in a half-rotted cabin at the edge of a dry creek bed half a day's ride from the border. He'd once worn the same coat as Boone. Now he wore only guilt. The old man met them with a shotgun, but the second Anoki stepped forward and said her father's name, he lowered it. "I've been waiting for this day," he said, eyes hollow. "Come on in." The cabin stank of old whiskey and older regret. Samuel poured one for himself, sat down on a broken chair and stared at them like they'd come to collect a debt he'd been trying not to pay. "I was there," he said after a long silence. "Red Hill. 16 years in the service and nothing haunts me like that day." He reached into a crate by the hearth and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside yellowed pages, handwritten orders. "That's Boone's hand," Samuel said. "He gave us the go, said we were cleansing the land. We didn't question it back then, just followed orders. Burned the homes, shot the men. I remember your father, brave son of a bitch, stood in front of the children. Boone made sure he died slow. Anoki's face was still, but her hands gripped the paper so tight it shook. "We can use this," Wes said, "but we need more." Boone had a journal, a campaign log, right? Samuel nodded. Red Rock Depot. Locked away, but he kept it close. Used to write in it every night. If it's still there, it's under the floorboards of his old office. That night, they didn't sleep. They rode straight through till dawn. The old Red Rock Depot looked like it had died sometime before the war ended, left to rot under the Texas sun. From a distance, the place seemed abandoned. Windows, boarded weeds, shoulder-high gates rusted on their hinges, but Wes knew better than to trust what looked quiet on the outside. Places like this had a way of keeping secrets long after the men who made them were gone. They came just after dusk, riding hard and silent, taking the long way around to keep the dust down. Anoki didn't speak the whole way, just kept one hand tight around the satchel slung across her shoulder, the other resting low near the knife hidden beneath her belt. When they reached the ridge above the depot, Wes pulled the horse up and studied the buildings below. He counted movement, shadows. A single lantern flickering in one of the side rooms, just barely visible through a cracked shutter. That light shouldn't have been there. "Someone's inside," he said mostly to himself. Anoki leaned forward, eyes sharp and quiet. "Then it's not abandoned." "No," Wes murmured, his voice dry. "And that means we play this careful." They left the horses tied under the ridge and walked the rest of the way in. Wes moved first, sticking to low ground and Shadow's boots silent on the dry grass. Every step forward felt like a bet he couldn't afford to lose. The air had cooled, but held a stillness that made sound carry. Even his breath felt too loud. At the western wall, they found an old supply entrance, rotted frame hinges half gone, but the door had been chained shut from the inside. Wes ran his hand along the wall and motioned to the side window glass cracked in 3 corners. It was old military issue designed to open from within, but whoever was still using this place hadn't secured it properly. He pulled a slim tool from his pocket, one of the last things he still carried from the war. The lock resisted at first, like it didn't want to remember how to give, but after a few careful turns and a whispered curse, it gave a soft metallic sigh, and the latch clicked. Wes opened it slow and steady, testing for creaks. Then he helped Anoki up first, her light frame slipping through like smoke. He followed after closing it behind them and sealing off the light. Inside the depot smelled like dust and grease and paper long since forgotten. The darkness pressed in tight. Wes could barely make out the hallway ahead, but he remembered the layout well enough from his time serving with the Scouts' command offices to the left, records room in the rear barracks down the far corridor. He paused. A sound. A low voice. Then another. Footsteps. And a third voice, lower, heavier, with a tone that didn't ask questions. Wes's stomach turned. Boone. That drawl was too familiar, the way he spoke, like everyone around him owed him something. Wes gestured to the side, pulling Anoki into a narrow alcove just as the footsteps grew louder. 2 shadows moved past them, not more than 10 feet away, one carrying a lantern, its glow painting flickers across the wall. Wes held his breath. He could feel Anoki's shoulder pressed against his chest, the tremble in her arms matched by the tension in his own. Neither of them moved. "Someone's been in here," Boone said, voice low but edged with suspicion. "I left that ledger on the top shelf. Could have been rats again," the other man offered, uncertain. "Rats don't open locked drawers," Boone snapped. "I want you to check every damn door." The hallway fell quiet again. They waited another minute before slipping deeper into the building, this time hugging the wall until they reached the end of the corridor. The door to the old command office was still intact, though time had warped the frame just enough that it groaned when Wes pushed it. Inside, the air was thick with heat and paper dust. A desk sat against the far wall, bare save for a stack of water-stained maps and a rusted oil lamp. Anoki didn't speak, just dropped to her knees and began tapping the floorboards in short, precise rhythms. She was listening for the hollow spot, the place Samuel Griggs told them about, the place Boone had once trusted to hide his sins. Then she stopped. A sound. Different. Empty beneath the wood. She reached for her blade, wedged it into the gap, and pried the board loose. Beneath, wrapped in wax cloth, was a black leather-bound book. Wes leaned in. He could feel her breath catch as she peeled the cloth back open to the page marked with a worn scrap of cloth. There it was. Village Deer Hollow. Apache mission. Total removal. Code sweep. Priority leader. Eliminate publicly. Below it, handwritten and underlined, Tawa. Her father. Anoki's hand went still. Her jaw tightened. Wes saw the fight in her start to buckle, saw the way grief and rage collided just beneath her eyes. Then, boot steps. Right outside the door. A voice. "Boone. Damn place always smells like rot," he muttered. "Still better here than Washington poking around in my reports." Wes snapped the board shut and grabbed the book. He stuffed it inside Anoki's satchel, then pulled her up by the wrist and motioned to the storage closet in the far corner. They dove inside, closing the slatted door just as Boone stepped into the room. Lantern light swept across the desk, then the floor. Boone grunted. Something clattered. He was checking the drawers. "I swear if anyone's been sniffing in my records." His voice trailed off. Then silence. For one terrible second, Wes thought the man had seen the dust disturbed on the floorboards, that he'd open the closet gun raised and end this all in a flash. But instead, Boone spat on the floor, cursed the rats again, and turned away. His boots receded, slow and heavy. Anoki didn't breathe until the hall fell quiet again. Only then did Wes press the closet door open, a sliver peering into the now empty room. He gave it a full minute. Then two. Finally, they slipped out. Hearts thudding, bodies coiled tight with adrenaline. They didn't speak until they were outside again, back in the brush behind the depot knees and the dirt eyes on the dark horizon. Anoki was still gripping the satchel like it might fly from her hands. Wes turned to her, voice low and dry. "You all right?" She nodded, but it was slow. Then her voice cracked, not from fear, but from something deeper. He wrote it like it was nothing, like my father was just a note on a page. Wes didn't know what to say, so he put his hand on hers. She didn't pull away. The ride to Wichita Falls was long, dry, and without laughter. They crossed 3 counties with nothing but dust behind them, and a weight sitting heavy in both their chests. The black leather journal rested inside Anoki's satchel, like a loaded pistol, no longer just proof, but a reckoning wrapped in faded ink. Neither of them said much as they rode. The road didn't leave much room for talk. But in the quiet, there was something else, a steadying presence. Wes had lived a long time with silence that screamed. This silence was different. It breathed. The federal building stood like a sore tooth in the middle of town, pale stone tall steps, and a flag that didn't wave so much as hang there half-hearted. They arrived late in the morning, horses drawn up outside Boots, tapping up those same stone steps, as a marshal narrowed his eyes from the entry post. "You folks got business?" "We got justice," Wes answered. "Or what's left of it." Inside the walls echoed. Everything smelled of ink, stale tobacco, and floor polish. A clerk at the desk looked at them like they didn't belong, which was fair. Two dusty strangers, one of them a native woman with fire in her eyes carrying a satchel like it held something that could burn the whole damn world down. Because it did. They were shown into a waiting room where Anoki sat upright, back, stiff hands clenched in her lap. She didn't pace, didn't tremble. But Wes could see the war inside her, the strain of holding steady for what came next. When they were called in, the hearing room wasn't what either of them expected. No judge's bench, no jury, just 4 federal officials seated behind a long table, papers stacked before them like sandbags. A stenographer tapped at a key machine. Another marshal stood near the door. Wes sat beside her, hat in his lap. When they asked who would speak, he started to answer, but Anoki beat him to it. "I will," she said. And her voice didn't crack. She didn't cry, not once. Her hands stayed still, her back straight, her voice calm. She spoke of the night her village burned, of her father's refusal to bow, her sisters being dragged away, the screams in the dark, the gunfire, the dust. Then she read from the ledger word for word. Clean sweep, no witnesses. And then she named the man who had signed it. Colonel Elijah Boone, she said, and the room went still as a grave. They asked questions. She answered each one. When Samuel Griggs was brought in, gray-bearded, shaking eyes downcast, he confirmed every word. He added names, dates, orders. Shame clung to him like sweat. He spoke slowly, but what he said was plain enough. Boone had turned a peacekeeping unit into a tool of slaughter, with Anoki's people as the first to fall. The final piece was the journal. Wes placed it on the table like it was something sacred, though it weighed more like a burden. One of the officials opened it carefully. His eyes moved. His jaw set. "This is his handwriting," the man said. And no one argued. The deliberation took less than a day. A single witness might be doubted. 2 could be called confused. But a soldier's sworn statement, a first-hand account from a survivor, and Boone's own journal sealed it like nails in a coffin. 3 days later, a press release hit the morning papers. Former Colonel Boone arrested. War crimes charged. Execution sentenced. Wes and Anoki stood together in the back of that courtroom when the verdict was read. Boone sat at the defendant's table in irons, still defiant, still sneering until the sentence came down. His face didn't crumble. It cracked. Anoki didn't speak. She just reached for Wes's hand, and this time she was the one who held tight first. He looked at her. No tears. No smile either. Just that fire in her eyes, softer now. Not burning everything. Just warming something old that had been frozen too long. For the first time in longer than Wes could remember, he didn't feel haunted. He felt settled. Not because Boone would hang, but because the world just once had stopped pretending men like Boone didn't exist. And in the hush that followed, he saw Anoki turn her head toward the courtroom window, where the afternoon light had just begun to shift. She didn't look back, because for once, she didn't have to. They didn't go back to the cabin. That place had served its purpose, a grave for the man Wes used to be. Instead, they rode farther west, past the hard land and the empty towns, past fences and old scars in the dirt, until the hills rose gentler, the grass grew taller, and a thin creek whispered its way through a quiet valley that felt untouched by everything they'd left behind. It wasn't paradise, but it was theirs. They built it slow, one wall at a time. The new house wasn't fancy, a single main room, a porch that faced the hills, and a small garden that Anoki planted with more confidence than Wes expected. She used herbs he didn't recognize. She knew which wood burned longer. She even found a spring nearby and showed him how to dig it out, proper stone, the edge, let it breathe. Apache ways, she told him. Quiet knowledge passed down. They slept apart at first, not out of fear, but caution. Not everything broken gets stitched back in one night. But the nights weren't cold anymore. Some evenings, Anoki sat on the porch, her hair loose, her feet bare, humming a tune so soft it felt like memory. Wes would sit nearby, whittling or just watching the horizon. There were times he'd see her fingers twitch like they remembered ropes around her wrists, and other times he'd feel his own hand reach for a rifle that wasn't needed anymore. Healing came slow, sometimes slower than either of them wanted. But it came. They talked more. Little things at first. Coffee horses, how to keep foxes from the coop. Then, over time, the big things. Wes told her about the baby they'd lost, the way his wife's fever had burned through their lives in 2 days flat. Anoki told him about her sisters, how she still saw their faces when she slept, though she didn't know if they lived or died. Neither expected comfort, but speaking the weight aloud made it lighter somehow. One night, as a storm rolled in across the valley and the wind pushed hard at the windows, Anoki came to stand beside his bed. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her eyes clear, her body quiet. He moved aside. She climbed in without a word. And from that night on, they didn't sleep apart again. Some weeks later, as summer began to lean into fall, Wes stood beside the fence they'd built with their own hands, looking out across the land that no longer felt empty. Anoki joined him. Her hand slipped into his. "I'm not leaving," she said, eyes on the horizon. "Not again. I've found my home." Wes turned his head and met her gaze. He didn't say much. He never did. But she didn't need words to know his answer. It was in the way he held her fingers, in the way he'd let the firewood pile run low if it meant sitting beside her another minute, in the way he no longer looked at the sky with that old hollow in his chest. They didn't forget the dead. The ones lost still lived in the corners of the house, in the pages of the journal they kept locked in a box by the fire. But they didn't let grief rule the days anymore. Grief had done enough. Now it was life's turn. When the sun set that evening, Wes and Anoki stood on the porch and watched the sky go gold, then crimson, then blue as dusk slipped in. The creek gurgled somewhere behind them. Crickets tuned their legs. The wind brought the smell of sage and earth. Wes glanced over. She was smiling, not big, not bright, just enough. That was plenty. And as the stars blinked to life, Wes put his arm around her shoulders, and for the first time in years, he looked toward tomorrow without flinching. Because sometimes, the desert doesn't stay dead. Sometimes, it gives you back something worth living for. And there we have it, folks. Wes and Anoki's journey etched into the dust of the Old West, but still echoing something timeless in each of us. I don't know about you, but this story stayed with me long after I finished writing it. It's not just about revenge or justice. It's about what happens after the fire dies down. It's about healing. Wes was a man broken by loss, wandering through life with nothing left to hope for. And Anoki, she carried the weight of a people erased her heart, held together by grit and grief. But somehow, through pain, silence, and stubborn humanity, they found each other. Not to fix the past, but to carry it with more strength together. What struck me most wasn't the gunfights or the courtroom. It was the quiet. The moments where two wounded souls learned to sit with the storm inside them. To trust, to love slowly, gently. That's the real miracle in a harsh world like theirs, and honestly maybe in ours too. This story at its heart is about choosing to live again, about letting the past shape you without letting it own you, about finding a home not in a place, but in a person. So, what did you take from Wes and Anoki's story? Did it make you think about your own healing or someone you've lost? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Really, I mean that. And if this story stirred something in you, don't forget to like, share, or send it to someone who might need a little hope too. Till next time, friends, stay kind, stay brave, and keep telling stories that matter.